This is one of the biggest humanitarian aid operations in the world. At the UN Syria Cross-Border Aid Center in Turkey's Hatay province, freight trucks are loaded with critical aid, including food, medical supplies, and shelter materials. But this may be one of their last shipments to northern Syria.
What you see behind me is the last delivery from the UN to the north of Syria. Through the years, we've tried to provide better conditions for the displaced civilians and lift their standards of living by providing aid. If this aid stops, we will return to zero.
Trucks have carried critical aid into the region since 2014. Most of the 4 million people in Syria's northwest, including the 2.6 million internally displaced, depend on humanitarian aid delivered through the only UN-authorized border crossing, Bab al-Hawa. The aid is vital for millions of people devastated by a decade of war.
If we don't receive the aid, we aren't able to survive. Can anyone survive without water and food? I lost my husband in the war, and I am looking after 7 kids.
Aid groups say last year the UN funded 204 humanitarian programs in northwest Syria worth $300 million. If the cross-border aid mechanism is not renewed, $90 million of funding could be lost. But Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's main ally, Russia, is indicating it won't vote to renew the program after it expires on July 10. Moscow says the UN aid should be delivered to Assad's government in Damascus.
The regime will use the aid as a weapon against people in northern Syria if it's distributed through Damascus. We've seen the regime act that way in the past, and we demand the international community will act.
The UN says some of Syria's most vulnerable people live in Idlib province, and the failure to extend authorization for the delivery of aid to them will have devastating consequences.
Millions of people are scattered across hundreds of similar camps with limited access to water, food, electricity, and medical care. They say they are afraid of what could happen if the cross-border aid they so desperately need isn't renewed. That fear is heightened by the Assad's government's continued attacks in southern Idlib, forcing many more civilians to flee the camps like this, where they may find help is no longer on the way. Resul, Serdar, Al Jazeera, Idlib, Syria.